Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best that you can be. My name is HarveyBracken-Smith, and today I'm honored to be joined by Rick Schonberg. Rick is the head of Coinbase Prime. He's the former global head of product development at LCH, the former lead product developer at Tagomi, a former senior MD at State Street, and a former MD at Goldman Sachs. I'm incredibly honored to speak to Rick today. I've heard a lot of great things from him, from a lot of great people, as well as seeing some of his awesome interviews online. He told me just before that this is his first one-on-one podcast interview, so I feel honored that he's chosen to do it on Personable. Rick, I wanted to get started off by asking you, why start off your career at Goldman Sachs and how did that lead to Coinbase?
Sure. So my career actually started before Goldman Sachs. Goldman was sort of like the start of like phase two of my career. It's sort of, I guess my early career, a lot of my career has been guided, I guess, by serendipity. But my first real job was much before that. And I guess right out of college, I didn't have a job. 91 was sort of a crap year to graduate. So I guess many recent grads will be experiencing that, so I can empathize. So I graduated from Princeton without a job, which is not how it's supposed to happen, but it was fine, and things worked out fine. So for anyone fretting out there, don't. And so I ended up getting a job through like responding to like a print ad in the Wall Street Journal, and eventually got a job at a Swiss bank in New York called Bank Julius Baer. I was there for about 18 months, and then switched to doing basically the same role, sitting on a foreign exchange desk, working with traders, doing a bit of sales work and a bit of technology related work for Chemical Bank, which then merged with Chase, took over the Chase name, and then acquired JP Morgan and took over the JP Morgan name. So that was like a legacy JP Morgan company, which I was at for about 9 years and change. Got an executive MBA in the middle, which is just, it's great if someone else pays for it, but MBAs are a big waste of time, and we can discuss that later if you want. And then from there, my career moved, I went into the technology group to help sort of build out some of the ideas I'd had, because we worked with hedge fund type clients, and we had to, they trade with us on margin. We had to build a margin system to track that. And I wrote up a business requirements doc, and this is before the advent of product people. And I gave that to the technology folks, and they're like, what do we do with this? I'm like, well, okay. So I joined the technology team, helped them project manage that. And then after that, stint in technology, I guess it was Chase at the time, spun back out and was doing some risk management, some yield math, some yield curve type math work on the risk team for the treasury group and for the fixed income derivatives teams there. And then the first .com wave happened, and I sort of grabbed onto that with both hands. That was my first time I was at work and being like, hey, like I'm working long hours, but I'm actually having fun for a change. This is great. So that was like sort of the epiphany of the light bulb going off of like work can be fun as well. And so that started there. So rode that wave, and then Chase merged with JP Morgan. And everyone said, like, don't get this guy as your boss. I won't name his name because that would be unkind, though he deserves unkindness. He was a bad human, and I got that guy as my boss. 13 months later, on my birthday in 2002, I got fired for the first time, and that was great. I was a mercy killing. I didn't have the courage or the cojones to quit on my own, and so I did that. Took time off, had a great time, traveled with my wife and her job for about 2-3 months, and then I lived my dream. I went to chef school. I worked full time in restaurants in the city, went to chef school. That was just great. And then the wife gave a not so gentle, shove towards the end of that year in '03 and said, house job, babies, go. So I went from there, unemployment and restaurants, to electronic brokerage company called EBS, which is now part of the CME group. And I was there for about 18 months, which was a very interesting time. It was a product management role, running pricing strategy as well. But that was when the FX market was just starting to electronify. Super interesting, gained a bunch of practical skills, and that place got a little tiresome after a while. But I was able to land a job at Goldman. There's a lot of funny stories around that. But basically, they didn't know what they wanted. They sort of wanted an E-guy. They didn't know what that was. They didn't understand really how I'd add value. I had some very funny interviews along the way. But eventually, I got a job offer, joined the EFX desk there, and sort of that started sort of phase two of my career, sort of in a sales seat at Goldman.
I feel like it's a tough thing to get someone to condense their entire career into less than 5 minutes, but I feel like you did a very good job of it.
Yeah, that was the first half.
That was only the first half. But just before we move on, I really like that you likened the 1991 when you were trying to get a job to 2025. And it's actually something that I've spoken to quite a few people about on podcasts today, with regard to a lot of graduates finding it tough to get jobs. It's been named one of the toughest times in 10 years in the UK to get a job. What advice would you give for graduates, even coming from some of the best universities on the planet, who are struggling to get entry-level jobs?
I have advice. Now, I'll caveat that by saying that what I went through, God knows, 30 odd years ago is different than what's going on today. So I'm not trying to say like, oh, here's a recipe, and if you fail at this, then you're a failure, because that's, I don't know what it's like to walk in kids' shoes today. I can have a sense, but my advice is, take it like you take a punch in the face, put an ice pack on it, stand back up and get back on your feet. It's not ideal, but you're not alone. And you have time. Right now, you have time. And so I would recommend that you don't waste that time, frivol away that time. If you find yourself scrolling anything, you're probably screwing up. Grab a book, read. I know people like to say that we're in a post-literate society. A great quote from Marcus Aurelius. He said that a man who does not read is no better than one who cannot read. So grab a book, read it, skill up. You can take online classes, network aggressively, take a job that is beneath you. Just work. I want if I look to people and I interview, pretty continuously, if I'm interviewing someone, like, you want them to be constantly improving themselves. Someone that's happy on a couch eating chips and surfing isn't going to be the kind of person that sort of moves the dial and in their work life. So you want someone who's not contented with the couch potato scenario and is doing something interesting. Maybe it's marathon training and taking an online class or two. Physically fit is important because it helps your mental fitness. Reading books, doing something different. I'll do some volunteer work. That's great. That's great for the soul. And network.
I think it's tough because I think for a lot of people, when there's been booming job markets, you can be way less skilled and still get a great job. There's a lot of stories from people in my parents' generation that started off working in IT or in back office and then got to the front office, or they went in not really knowing anything, just getting coffees, and worked their way up into great businesses. But in a highly globalized world, the access to talent is so large and you've got so much competition that it's so hard to break in. But particularly in today's day and age, for a variety of factors, from the constant swinging from we're doing well to we're not doing well, to the big use of AI, so there's way less junior level recruiting because AI can do a lot of those jobs. It's much harder to break in. But I really like your emphasis on upskilling and not just sitting back, because at the end of the day, when that job market does get better and when there are more opportunities, it's better to have better systems in place, such as your fitness, being mentally disciplined, being able to wake up early, work on some project, whatever it may be, so that when the time arises, you're even better for it.
Yeah. So agree with everything you said. I think there's another sort of issue, which is sort of the Instagram, like everything's curated. Everyone gets a great job and, gets perfect grades or is captain of this or captain of that. And, you get that great job and you go straight into private equity or whatever sort of glorious career. That's a meat grinder for those who haven't realized it. It goes into some great glorious career and oh, but me, I haven't done this glorious path and like you feel less than. And that's wrong. So I think the sort of the implied social shaming that you get through these curated views of people didn't exist in my era. Like I had a very unimpressive job out of college. I had no job, but then when I got a job, it was on paper unimpressive, but it was great. It wasn't highbrow at all, but it was brass knuckles, brass tacks, sort of like, you learn things on a trading desk. I got to fall around the head trader and go to lunches with him and just shut up and learn. Priceless. Doesn't look good in the resume. Did I get coffee? Yes. I got coffee, I got beer, I got whatever beverage was required in the moment, and I learned. I didn't even know I was learning, but that's a great job. I think people's standards are too influenced by influencers, and I think that's sort of breaking people's brains. I don't think we're sort of animals built for that. And all the influencer-approved jobs could fit in, a teacup. People need to do real work. I think that, take a job, like I said, that's air quote beneath you. Take a job. Job's good, money's good. The vast satisfaction you get from supporting yourself is good. Network, do stuff on the side. And those are all good things to sort of help someone down that path.
I think you make a really good point, particularly on the influencer side, which I hadn't mentioned. And there's, again, something I've really tried to focus on with this podcast, in that there are many influencers who have millions of followers, as well as kind of, you have the micro communities with LinkedIn where everyone's a team captain. But if you look at a broader scale, it would be the influencers with millions of followers, when they actually don't have any credible experience. And so many people are learning from these great gurus who say that they know what they're doing, but they actually haven't done it. And so their only means to business success is by selling the course, aka selling the thing that you're buying from them. And it's awful, because it's so many people are being led down this false pretense of what success really means. And something that I'm trying to do through this podcast is take people that are really successful, that may have an audience, but also may not, and basically bridge that gap to say, hey, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but if this is the path that you really want, here's what you have to do, or at least here's what they did, so that you can have an increased percentage chance of actually being successful again in your own life in whatever way that you deem success to be.
Yeah, it's sort of like, again, I love adages and metaphors and stuff like that. But it's sort of like the one like before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. I think like, I don't think people have a great sense of what a good job is. They sort of like, get rich quick, and as we get into digital assets and crypto, like that's obviously a negative aspect of this industry, is that there's too much of that here. And success people measure by like paycheck or car in your driveway. I mean, my wife is embarrassed by the car I have in my driveway. It's the car my girls drove to high school and beat the tar out of. I drive twice a week at most. Like, what do I need a nice car for? But that's not a measure or way someone should measure their own progress. Like, your own success isn't a function of your bank account. There are plenty of people with a lot of bank, and you wouldn't want their life. And probably they don't want their life either. And so, like, that's the wrong measure. And again, it's that influencer culture, and it's the materialistic culture we're sort of stuck in today, where we try and measure our happiness, whether it's what your Aura ring tells you, how well you slept, or your bank account tells you how good a person you are. I mean, those are both flawed. I love my Aura ring, by the way, which is a separate topic. But the joy is measured very differently.
I kind of have a route that I want to take this podcast down, and I think I still will go down that route, but I didn't realize how philosophical you were. And I think that you get a lot of philosophical people who go and do great things, and then you get people that are stuck thinking about doing great things. And that's kind of one of the downsides of philosophy, is getting stuck in thought and not doing. With regard to philosophy and what you're doing, you've obviously accomplished many great things. You've lived many amazing careers, whether it be in Goldman Sachs or in Coinbase or in State Street. Was it a physical destination thing that you would get, or was it a state of being? And how has that evolved over time?
Oh man, I grew up in LA in the 70s. It was like two lifetimes ago. I was always driven very hard to succeed. I played sort of competitive soccer until my knees gave out, and then I did tennis, which oddly wasn't as bad on my knees as soccer. And then I did martial arts for a bit, and then I sort of gave up sport in college, and I sort of regret it. I do a bit of skiing now, and I try and stay fit through working out and stuff, but I sort of miss that. I qualify, and I cycle and stuff, but like in my mind, it's a whole separate conversation to have around sport, and I have a very specific definition of what is a sport and what isn't, which I usually just get into to piss off golfers, because golfing is the furthest thing from a sport you can possibly imagine. But it's a team sport. And I think that element of sort of team is important. But in terms of what I saw success as, I didn't know. And my dad was a doctor. He'd grown up in Long Island, moderately successful doctor, but just worked 3 days a week, 3.5 days a week, half-day surgery, 3 days of seeing patients. He was an eye doctor. My mom grew up in a very sort of tough life, being Jewish in Nashville in the 1940s, 50s, not an easy place, and poor. Her father died when she was 12. My father ended up dying when I was 16.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So my idea of success, initially I thought I wanted to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor. I was always breaking something. And so I was in and out of the doctor's office quite a good bit. And so I thought that's what I wanted to be, was a doctor. And then circumstances being what they were, I'm like, okay, I need to make some money. So I'll major in economics, and I liked economics and math. So that's what I ended up doing. Just sort of serendipity drove me into finance.
I unfortunately have a very similar upbringing, in the sense that I lost my mum at 19, so I can relate to you having lost your father. Something that I was thinking about was, having lost my mum at 19, and my mum died at 50 years of age. Obviously, I hope that I'll live past my mum and that I don't get cancer, but that would give me 31 years from the date that she died in order to have kids, family, be successful, fit, run a marathon, climb Mount Kilimanjaro, build a business, whatever it may be. But 31 years. I think people imagine life to be this endless Disney film type scenario where everything ends up well in the end. But actually, it's kind of given me this sense of urgency to be like, being like my mum, I have 30 years to make the most of my life. Did you have a similar mindset when your father passed away? What was that sense of urgency, belonging like? And what kept you going, having lost an important person in your life?
Yeah, so I didn't think about it quite as much then as I did sort of in the later years. I just knew I had to, I was going to be on my own 2 feet, and that was just going to be how it was. There was no other way. Like, my mom supported me, paid for my college, which was amazing. So I graduated without debt, which it was, her gift to me, and hopefully I've tried to pay that back. But so that was, being self-sufficient was, the, mission number one. And so everything else was secondary. So like I said, the early part of my career, I had no drive. Wasn't trying to be successful, wasn't trying to be a trader. I had plenty of chances to get into trading, which is theoretically where the big bucks are. I just never, I stared enough at screens every day. I didn't want that stress and such, and I'm not inherently a gambler. So I like doing the math behind the yield curve and the term structure of rates and stuff. Freaking fascinating, and fun to model and fun to work with. But I didn't want to be the person, doing the trades, managing the risk. That didn't appeal. I sort of had cruise control for a while. It was frankly lost without having a father figure and an anchor. You sort of drift out. And then it was sort of that later part of my career, where the later part of the first phase at JP Morgan still, where I liked doing the venture capital work, I liked doing the e-commerce work, was having fun, was just getting married. That's sort of when I sort of got a little bit more serious about life. But then sort of going back to something you said in terms of you count how old you are to your mother when she passed. My father was 48. I'm now 56. So I'm sort of +8. But there's that inflection point and you're like, oh, I'm here. It's like I got there. That's sort of like the goal. But then you realize, as you see, I got kitty pictures in the background. I have 2 daughters. It's like it's not over yet. Like, you're not suddenly done. You still have more mountains to climb.
So you have a career in which, despite what you said about it being, just kind of going along, and then the second part of your career, which we haven't delved into as much so far. But when I think of more traditional success in finance, I think of Goldman Sachs, I think of State Street, and I think now people would think of Coinbase just because of how incredible it's become over the last couple of years. But when you kind of took up that role, even since around, if you look at 2020, 2021, Bitcoin was around, I think, around $10,000. And then it's reached over 100,000 in the past 4 or 5 years. So it's 10x. I think it's a little bit below that now. But as much as it's become more institutionalized, you get people like Jamie Dimon not supportive of it to being supportive of it. The amount of a 10x change over 4 or 5 years is simply insane. So could you tell me a little bit about what made you want to get into crypto in the first place, and how you institutionalized a digital asset that has been so volatile over the past few years?
Yeah, so there's a funny story there. So when I left Goldman in 2014, I went to State Street and I was running a product team, and the initial ambition was bigger than what we ended up executing on. And so after about 3 years of that, we sort of wanted to merge these couple businesses together, and that's why I was brought in, and it wasn't really happening, and the exec sort of lost the will to make the hard decisions. And so at the end of it, I said to her, as my boss, I'm like, well, if this isn't what you want to do, then you sort of, that's what you hired me for, then I guess that's it then. And there's a pause on the phone, and she's like, oh, that was easier than I thought. I'm like, oh, I guess this really is it. This isn't brinksmanship. And so that was my second time getting fired. And so after that, I'm like, okay, I got to do a couple things. I have a mortgage, I got to save for college and stuff for my daughters. And I'm okay. 2 rules. 1, no consulting, because consulting doesn't pay really. And I want equity and all the other fun things that sort of can pay the mortgage. And 2, it's like, FX, foreign exchange markets are the Wild West. The only thing wilder than FX is crypto. No consulting and no crypto. And then a couple months later, I'm looking, and it's a hard grind. When you're, again, as you were talking about young graduates today, when you don't have a job and you want a job or need a job, it's a hard grind. And so it was depressing and demoralizing and stuff. And I was networking, and I was chatting with a buddy of mine and a former partner at Goldman, a great guy, and someone I knew from back in the day. And he called up and said, Rick, I got a job for you. I'm like, great. I'm like, yes. And this is the kind of guy that you just say yes to. He is just a great human, unlike that old manager from JP Morgan. And I just said, yeah. I'm like, oh, by the way, what am I doing? He's like, oh, you're going to consult for my crypto company. I'm like, 2 things I swore I wouldn't do. So that's how I got into it. So I started there, and I was at the startup for 5-ish months. I didn't love one of the co-founders. There's a lot of friction there. And so I just, in the end, I ended up moving on. That's where I went to London Clearing House, where I was head of product for the Forex Clear group. But that's how I got into it. And I went to Forex Clear. It was interesting. It was a fun, interesting challenge, and skills and stuff that have benefited me now. Very regulated and very slow to progress things. And being sort of on the post-trade end of derivatives world, a little less adrenaline. As much as I didn't said I didn't like the Wild Wild West. I guess deep down, after all those decades, I've been institutionalized, and I like the Wild Wild West. So I went back to Greg. I'm like, oh, please hire me back, hire me back. And at this point, 2 years had passed. That company had been very successfully acquired by Coinbase. So I ended up rejoining that same team, or most of that same team, but now at Coinbase. And that was 2021.
But you had the two things that you didn't want to do, both consultancy and crypto. I can understand the consultancy a bit more so, less so from the money standpoint, but more so from it's a more traditional industry. But crypto really is the Wild West. And I feel like it's something that I feel like management consultancy, a lot of people understand, but crypto is still something that even the smartest minds in finance are trying to understand. So when you got into that role, particularly at Coinbase, what did your role entail? How has it evolved? How do you deal with such crazy fluctuations in the price in long-term planning?
Yeah, so my fear of, and again, probably the same reason I didn't take the trading jobs, is my risk appetite is sort of, you can call it bipolar, or be nice, we'll call it bimodal. I like being really close to lots of risk and staring over the edge or participating, but not sort of being in with both feet and maybe 1 foot in. Anyhow, so we can mix that metaphor a bit. But when I started off there, we were acting as sort of the bridge for institutional clients getting properly into digital assets. So we were building, agency execution algorithms, smart order routers, all the basic primitives that one would expect in a traditional finance, or we call it TradFi, that you'd expect. So the TradFi players could come into digital assets and have like a like-for-like experience. They use, a protocol called FIX to trade. Well, we need FIX protocol for them to trade. They think of an asset, and this is where the foreign exchange sort of plays nicely with crypto, in that it's effectively an extension of a foreign exchange market. It's, asset one for asset two. It trades on a deliverable basis. All these things that are sort of very consistent with the foreign exchange market. So that helps. So we're trying to build these basic primitives so someone could say, oh, I'm used to this idea. We call it custody. You call it custody. Therefore, it's the same thing. And that's both the truth and a lie at the same time, in that it's truthful and that it gets them forward. It achieves the same function. But if you think of digital asset custody the same way as you think of a security custody or a physical commodity custody, it's actually entirely different. We use the same words as like a bridging term to get people in. Once they're in, that use of terminology actually hurts us, because they're like, oh, like it's just custody. I'm like, well, it's a little different. And the differences are on some level nuanced, but on many levels sort of quite important. But just that initial phase coming in, I was just in charge of our trading business within the prime sphere. And this was a very important time, because we were acting as that bridge. We eventually brought in, again, obviously public record, public information, BlackRock, which was a game changer. I think it was Jan of 24 when they launched the IBIT ETF, and that was something my team was heavily involved in. I was heavily involved in. It was a great partnership, and that really sort of was an inflection point for the industry. And I believe it was one of, if not BlackRock's most successful ETF launch ever. It was again, good partnership, good for both partners. It was good for the industry, and that was the type of thing we did. We were bridging a player such as that, very much a traditional finance player, bring them in. They're a very crypto forward firm, so it wasn't like we had to drag them along by any stretch. But there was sort of a lot of basic things we had to do to get their platform, Aladdin, and all their systems and all their people understanding that, like, okay, we call it custody, but there are significant differences in how you interoperate with it. And so that was the start. And then 2 years into that, there was a change in the person who used to run our custody business. He left, and I took over our custody business and a platform team. And then, so right now we're in custody for Coinbase, and then more recently picked up our FCM. So you spin all those units together, the trading, the FCM, and the custody, and that's effectively our prime brokerage business.
I think another really tough thing with regard to cryptocurrencies is not everyone using crypto has got the best intentions. So particularly going back 5-10 years ago, a lot of criminals would use it, but as it's become much more adopted by institutions, that still exists, but there is also a much greater understanding of the risks imposed by cryptocurrencies, and so people can make best measures. Even if the regulations haven't yet caught up, even the businesses such as Coinbase, such as BlackRock, like you mentioned, can go about governing themselves in order to better understand what's going on with it. But if I was to look at two of the former big competitors of Coinbase, please correct me if they're not competitors, like FTX and also Binance, both people that were often seen as leaders within the space, in their own separate ways have being involved with criminal enterprise. So when things like that happen, how do you go about continually building trust with big institutions who often move slow, that crypto is actually another form of investment that can be trusted despite other thought leaders falling back?
Yeah, so again, it's a very good question, and we are very much in the trust business. Whether even if we're just doing trading for clients, they still need to trust us. And as a custodian, as a safekeeper, a fiduciary, safekeeping client assets, again, we are fundamentally in the trust business. I went through a quote with my leadership team recently where I pulled out a quote from Charlie Munger, and he said something to the effect that he was not a crypto fan, but if you read his other sayings about the economic forces and trust, actually, he's a closet crypto fan is sort of what I concluded in the end. But he has a statement about how sort of trust is like the greatest economic force in history, and we're in the trust business. And in many ways, digital assets are digital trust. You've decentralized, and you've added a peer-to-peer element as well. This one thing you said before about sort of bad actors using crypto. Bad actors also use a lot of cash. That doesn't make cash bad. And just because bad actors used crypto doesn't make crypto bad. And in fact, the nature of the way digital assets work with public blockchains and public ledgers, and in terms of the way Coinbase interoperates, we have, again, my experience at London Clearinghouse, the reason why it's so valuable. At the time, I think we worked with 13 different regulators. We now work with fewer, but we work with more than one. Our main custodial entity is regulated by the New York Department of Financial Services. And so we are a licensee. We run a limited purpose trust company out of New York, and we lean into regulation. We have very, strict rules around anti-money laundering, avoiding tax evasion, Bank Secrecy Act compliance. I don't view those as like a checklist of things that we must do to satisfy the regulators. We do those because it's the right thing to do. And it's part and parcel. It's nothing we would water down if given the opportunity to. It's something we lean into. We have no appetite to aid and abet tax evasion or any sort of, legal malfeasance or criminal activities. Just that's not what we do. It's not why we're here. And I don't think it's good for the industry. So there are all these fun rules out there that are sort of TradFi in certain ways and are annoying as you can possibly imagine for us to implement with the velocity of transactions we have. But something called a travel rule: money goes in, money goes out. In this case, digital assets go in, digital assets go out. We tag and track everything that goes in and out of our systems and share it with sort of the people that track these things. So there can be, to help mitigate the risks of tax evasion. And we track with, OFAC screening and all the other fun stuff we have to do from a regulatory perspective to make sure that we're not involved with bad actors. And we have no patience for that. So in terms of our approach and how we sort of differentiate ourselves from the others, and this is sort of our, to the great credit of our legal and policy teams, we have been pounding the table for no regulation. We're not looking for some sort of, anarchy, and just freedom to do anything. We want just clean rules, level playing field. And just once you have that set up, we want strong rules for growth. We want to help make the U.S., but help the global economy grow and promote economic freedom. And for that, we need just clean rules, fair rules. And that's what we've lobbied for. We've not been trying to sort of bend them, water them down. And in the end, it's actually been quite good for us. And it's sort of helped our brand of being the most trusted because we've been very consistent in that message. And over time, we've won a lot of legal cases. And in the end, we've started to see very progressive, a very forward-thinking regulation out of DC that's been very constructive for the world of digital assets and still having strong consumer protections. We're not looking to take away consumer protections and throw them away either. That's not the point. Lock down the rules, clearly state how they're going to be enforced by the regulators, and then just let us do our thing.
If I was to think about the likes of BlackRock, Blackstone, businesses that have hundreds of billions, if not trillions, in assets. Similarly with you guys have tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions in assets that you guys safeguard for people. One of the big issues with traditional banks is that they were exposed to the possibility for competition. I'm saying competition is a good thing, but competition through not having the best consumer experience. And that's something that you guys are very good at. But it's also something that Revolut exploited, and now they've reached a valuation of more than 75 billion, in that they could create a consumer banking app that was much better to use. You could track your expenses, you could add friends on it, versus the kind of archaic systems that a lot of other banks used. And so they could be exploited in losing a lot of their market share to Revolut. With Coinbase, from an outsider, I'm not a a very knowledgeable crypto guy, but Coinbase is one of the names that I hear the most. And it seems that the assets keep growing both alongside the more individuals using the platform, the likes of BlackRock offering services for it, but also as the price of Bitcoin seems to keep going up. But what do you think are some of the biggest threats to Coinbase from potential competitors? And what are you guys doing to stop that from happening by innovating in-house?
Sure. So I have a bit of a traditional response, sort of like competition, like, you go up and you punch it in the face type of thing. But interestingly enough, our CEO has like a very sort of different zen to it. And his view, and I've come around to it, is that like, no, crypto, the water's warm, come on in. And the way I've internalized that and the way I express it back to my teams is like, there's no world in which Coinbase is successful and alone. For us to be ultimately successful, for the industry to succeed, we're gonna have a lot of company. So you can't go punching it in the face. That's just wrong. And so that's where my instincts have been, clearly, I've changed and modified that a lot. So who are our competitors? What is competition? What are we looking to achieve? You kind of have to ask the larger question. We want more people in this industry. We want it to be normalized. If it's something edgy and esoteric and viewed as risky, then it's not going to be as optimally successful. And so we're really looking to see how do we grow the pie, and then as a first order effect, and then if we do our jobs right, just by sheer nature of who we are and sort of our drive, we'll command a very large slice of that pie. And so, and that's how we operate. So we're not looking to sort of restrain competition or have an unfair advantage, or we're not looking to have 90% of market share of absolutely every single space and every single thing. We want people to come in. We want there to be a proliferation. We want there to be competition. And a lot of what we do is pro-competition. We are a tough competitor. I'm sure our peers would do that. But at the same time, I'm a top customer of many of our competitors. So for example, in the trading business we operate, we have a multi-venue smart order router that sends flow to competing exchanges. I get gift baskets at Christmas. It's fantastic. Fortnum & Mason, cookies, teas. It's great. But we're good customers, and we're a good partner to them, and I don't deny them or wish them ill. I want them to succeed. I genuinely do. They're nice people there. They're friends of mine at this point in the industry. There's no malice. Not every would-be partner is as open-minded to this possibility. Some of them are sticks in the mud, and I hold that against them. But like for the most part, most people understand that it's a large market and that it's only going to get as large as it can be if we're all sort of going at it, constructively but collectively.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to add to what you were saying with that. The actual biggest thing right now is not taking more or less of the current pie that it's at, but if you can get global adoption from institutions, from individuals, from companies, both in terms of transacting Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, B2B and B2C, that is actually a much bigger market than possibly cutting off a competitor. And actually by having more competition, you have more people going into it, more interest in crypto, therefore more trust in crypto as you have more good actors, or the market as a whole gets bigger, gets more trusted. And then in the future, you could go about perhaps trying to get rid of the competition. But at this point in time, I agree with your point that this is different to most other businesses where the markets are more matured already. And actually it's about how do you get as many people in the space? Okay, now this is a multi-trillion-dollar market, and then we go and get our piece of the pie.
Yeah, and then there's a nice topic to segue into, which is stablecoins, because it sort of hits at an interesting point of competition and innovation. And, we're obviously a big fan of stablecoins, at large, most specifically USDC, given our partnerships there. And, we see that market growing tremendously. And it's the less sexy end of crypto in certain ways in that, the number doesn't go up. The number stays at 1. It's par. That's where it's supposed to stay. So then where's the fun in that? And the fun in that is today, if Harvey, if I had to send you $100,
sure.
That's kind of...
I'll send you my details now.
Yeah. Well, if I had your base address, I could send it to you right now. But I could send you USDC on base in half a second for half a penny, and we could both see the transaction go through, and it'd be deterministic, and that's powerful. And so that power in the world is truly more interesting than I think people have fully baked into sort of how they see the world evolving, where two people can pay each other without an intermediary. Most of my time in the foreign exchange markets were spent sort of incrementally, changing the dynamic, between buy side and sell side and who's the winner, and there are different entrants into the sell side with hedge funds coming in and stuff like that. And you changed the names on the leaderboard, but the market structure was largely unchanged. You had your buy side, sell side, and intermediaries sort of extracting rents in between customers. But now we have the ability with digital assets. This is sort of some of the things that make me most excited about the space and its prospects is like, what intermediary? Like, you've actually changed. And that's actually the difference between sort of like an iterative progress and true reimagination. Like, I've spent a lot of time thinking I'm innovating, and I wasn't. I was just sort of iterating. And I think innovation versus iteration, it's a big step. And I think this actually is innovative. And so with stablecoins coming in, the ability to, instead of having, $100 in your pocket earning you no interest, you could have $100 of USDC in your pocket earning rewards. And, you could then transfer it to someone else and they would instantly be earning rewards. So it's not an inert dead object. And this is where if you look at like the annual reports of let's pick on JP Morgan because they're a great firm, a shareholder. But let's pick on them. They earn $96 billion a year in net interest income, like $2 billion a week, plus or minus. And you take a couple weeks off for Christmas. That's just, that's not right. I was talking to my daughter about the fact that she had a savings account at Chase, where I bank. Again, I was an ex-employee. And like, she was sitting there since she was a kid and they didn't pay her any interest. She's like, why didn't they do that? It's like, well, they earned it, but they didn't pay you any because they pocketed it. It's like, why? Well, you got taken advantage of. It's like, why? It's like, but that's the game. Why? It's like, that's the thing. Well, it doesn't have to be the game. Like, you come to Coinbase, we can put that in USDC and you'll be earning rewards. And so I think that's what's going to change. And I guess on some level, that's us competing with the traditional industry a bit. And this is what some of the things that Genius Act envisions. And we know the banks will push back on that. But like this will be the back and forth. And at the same time, they're going to enter into digital asset space and offer trading and various things and custody. And so there will be healthy competition, and you can measure the health by the advantages accrued to our end customers. If in the end, people like you or people like one of my daughters has a savings account that suddenly starts paying them like, normal interest rates. And if you can, send someone money very quickly, very cheaply, and have that money be instantly earning rewards for both parties at the same time, and that's fantastic. That's like true. Now we're moving past iteration to actually being innovative, because the rents, the value, the consumer surplus stays with the individuals. And that's where it can have the most impact.
Before this podcast, you mentioned you've been on a few podcasts with the likes of Cathie Wood, who often makes predictions based on where they think a stock price might be in a few years' time. I want to ask you a different type of question, balancing both idealism and realism. So if you were to look at a lot of your business, if I was to break it down into two parts, I know there's a lot more to it, but if I was to break it down into individuals and institutions, so why should someone like myself or your daughter come onto Coinbase? Why should we use it? What's the benefits for me today in 2025 in December versus institutions? But in BlackRock, January 2024, as you said in the business you did with them there, I want you to talk to me about the future. So 10 years time, maybe I have a family, I have hopefully a good job, a lot of my friends as well, hopefully doing the same, or anyone that's listening to the podcast, wherever they are. So in 10 years time, not just at Coinbase, but the whole crypto landscape, in an ideal world, if everything was to go to plan, what would that look like? And also the difference between the idealism and the realism, what do you think will actually happen in 10 years time at base case?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. And the funny thing is, like, 10 years in crypto is like lifetimes. But like, if you go back in time, people were asking the same question about like you had like when Amazon was a jungle in South America and not a company. People were talking about like online, going online, buying things online, or they even weren't talking about it quite yet because Amazon really made that happen. And then there was this concept of Barnes and Nobles versus a bookstore called Amazon, and like, is it going to be brick and mortar stores, or will you just be the websites you click on, or will be, there's a term called clicks and bricks, or if you go back in the literature, it's probably before you were born. But they then had the term again. I was part of a group called that had e-commerce in the title, and we used to joke that at some point it's just going to be called commerce, and like, no, it's going to be called e-commerce. Now it's just commerce. And so, like, what is the world going to look like in 10 years time? I don't think there'll be a crypto industry. I think crypto will be the financial industry. I think it'll all have some element of crypto as part of it. And it'll all sort of like the Borg in Star Trek, sort of assimilate it. And it'll sort of come into the norm. if you want to, sort of every step in the life cycle of sort of capital markets, from issuing stock, raising capital, to having an IPO, to paying employees, it'll be achievable on chain with blockchain based solutions, which is like, well, wait a second, why? Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something, but like, what does that do? And sort of to my example in the foreign exchange markets, there's a lot of consumer surplus. There's a lot of rents the bankers extract. And it's fine. They deserve a paycheck. They have capital. They have balance sheet. They have advisory. And they should get paid for that. Now, I haven't studied up on the whole HBO Netflix thing, which is very topical at the present moment. But the banker fees, so I heard on Bloomberg Radio, someone was saying how just extraordinary they are. I'm like, oh, they really deserve billions of dollars for this? Maybe. But like, if you're launching a company, why do they deserve 7% of your company? Like, why isn't it a fixed fee? Is your company a big company or a small company? If it's 10 times the size, are they putting in 10 times the effort, 10 times the advice, 10 times the capital? No. So they don't deserve an extra fee, but they take it. And that's because there's no alternatives, no competition. So I think as this steps in to compete, all those aspects in the capital market lifecycle will suddenly have competition like they didn't have. Similar to my example about the foreign exchange and payments, sort of not just being like a shift in like the sell side. It used to be just banks, and then it was banks and some hedge funds, and now it's a far more competitive landscape. But there's still a buy side and sell side. What if you can just take down those walls and have it be peer-to-peer? You start a company, you pay your employees, you don't need a bank account, you do it all through Coinbase, or you do it all via blockchain type solutions. You then get to the point where you want to raise capital. We've done some acquisitions recently in the space, a company called Echo, recently also a company called Liquify. And we're doing a lot in the space. We recently did a launch for a company, a capital raise that we did quite publicly through our retail app. So I think the purchase size of the average person purchasing these tokens that were issued, I think it was in the thousands of dollars. It was small, so very much democratizing access. And then, that's the start of, down that path. And so I think more and more will sort of end up on what's effectively a digital platform. And I think that's just the way the banking will be. So I think 10 years from now is a long time. So I think it's sort of like my commerce versus e-commerce type question. I think, crypto and TradFi, those names get dropped and it's just finance again. Finance has been accruing a thicker and thicker technology layer sort of in all the decades I've been in it. And I think this thing's moving a bit faster and a bit more transformationally, but in a lot of ways it's the same.
Despite them having been bad actors with Sam Bankman-Fried, something that FTX did really well is they took crypto from this Wild West thing that no one really knew about, and particularly their Super Bowl ad took it to something that a lot of people can understand, feel, and potentially invest in. Obviously, they did it the wrong way, but what they did right was that they made it seem like something much more approachable, usable, relatable in what they're doing on the day-to-day basis. So on the presumption that in the future, more people will adopt crypto, particularly as the younger generations come through, learn about it, seeing it in the big banks and institutions, with them adopting it, I have a view that it would trickle down. But I think one of the big problems of crypto is because it isn't a fiat currency, one way that governments obviously make their money is through taxation. And so they use the fiat currencies. Obviously, they get unbelievably large amounts of debt, which is obviously not working out very well in the West right now. But oftentimes that debt is used in order to, they also by printing more money, build roads, build schools, do things like that, help people in the different countries. What would you say to governments? I know Trump's pretty pro crypto, but in the US, in the UK, in much of the West and around the world, as to why they should adopt crypto more mainstream, and if they did, how they would go about getting taxation in a world when cryptocurrencies aren't necessarily tied to your name.
Sure. A couple things. One, I guess today's my day for making strange esoteric quotes, but I think it was Emile Zola who said, armies cannot stop an idea whose time has come. Of course, that's not an exact paraphrasing, plus he was probably in French, so I probably have that one covered. It's close enough. And so I don't think it's up to governments to sort of try and put the genie back in the bottle. It's not going back. So with that, how do we help governments operate and not crumble? Crumbling governments isn't good for anyone. It's not good for crypto either, for that matter. For one, I mentioned, stablecoins, USDC as an alternative to fiat, but it's more like an extension. People, I think calling it like an alternative sort of says, oh, it's the anti-fiat. It's like, no, it's an extension, and it's a digital extension, and it's a more powerful extension. And what's interesting, I wish I had the numbers. I hadn't thought to sort of dig these up beforehand. If you look at Circle, who that is the operator of USDC, and you look at Tether, who's the operator of USDT, and you look at what they do in terms of how much the money they put into US Treasuries, they're, I think combined, they're somewhere in the top 10, I think. And forgive me if I have that wrong, but you'll footnote that one if I do. In terms of having ownership, so like it's not like the governments are losing like capital. It's actually being cycled into treasuries, and it's very constructive for them. They're very happy for it, rather than just sitting in cash, under a cushion. Having it sort of buy treasuries, help them sort of take care of their debt addiction is a good thing. So that's for one. For two, there is something I mentioned before actually called travel rule, where it's pseudo-anonymous. It's not anonymous, at least the way we operate. And so in our world today, you have a bank account tied to your name, and you have what's considered sort of the rails where you sort of on-ramp into digital asset on a reputable platform, ours or one of our competitors. And you can then send that to an anonymous wallet, but it's pseudo-anonymous. That wallet's anonymous. It has some cool name associated with it. But from a flow of funds perspective, the firm, such as ours, has taken the flow from your account with your name into that wallet, and we've tracked it in something called travel rule. We are regulatorily required to do so, part of European MiCA regulations, part of US regulations. And so that's traced. It's anonymous now. It's just like if you want to, pay your landscaper, $20 or $50 or something like that, you can do that with cash. You can do it with crypto. It's done anonymously, but it's pseudo-anonymously in the land of crypto. They can still collect taxes. Again, as I said, we're not here to help tax evasion or trying to undermine government's ability to raise revenues. But then again, in Europe, you have a lot of value-added tax, which is a consumption tax, which is if I'm paying for something, whether it's with Bitcoin or a stablecoin, it's taxed at moment of purchase. So maybe the world moves more towards consumption taxes, though they're sort of inherently a little bit regressive. I still think they're quite effective. They encourage savings, but they do sort of penalize lower income people as a percentage of their income. But there are other ways to compensate for that. But we don't break things. It doesn't break the system. The system might need to evolve too. Tax regulations and how they raise tax revenues, that might have to evolve a bit. But I don't think we're a fundamental threat. We don't undermine that. And especially sort of the regulated venues. We're well regulated. The regulators, they know what they're doing. And it's not that hard. And the rules existed in TradFi for decades and decades, and they're just applying versions of that to us. So it's, they're not having to reinvent the rules either.
Despite what you say about stablecoins, and you see firms like Amazon often, who have recently said that they're going to use stablecoins as part of their businesses, do you expect that Bitcoin will continue to go up 10x in 10 years? Like, I'm not asking from an investment point of view, but more so, if there is to be this widespread adoption of crypto, will it be the normalization that, just like the S&P 500, that on average over 50 years has gone up 8 to 12%, that the currency being Bitcoin will continue to go up at that point? Or is there a point in 5, 10, 20 years time that you expect Bitcoin to be around a similar sort of level? Because I see that most people in crypto would likely be using Bitcoin with regard to stablecoin.
So people fall in different camps, and I'll be at like a conference with the strategy folks, and they're a Bitcoin crowd. They're like, everything's Bitcoin all the time. If you watch some of Michael's presentations on it, they're legion. He's amazing. He can talk for an hour and just captivate you. And at the end of it, you're like, oh, I don't want enough Bitcoin. I got to go buy more Bitcoin. Like, it's very convincing. But like you hear the USDC crowd or the stablecoin crowd, that makes intuitive sense. So you believe in both. In my mind, it's not an either or. I think the price of Bitcoin, it is a finite supply. There's continuing demand. I think that sort of points to a direction of travel. But I think in terms of what ends up taking off more, whether it's Bitcoin or stablecoins, I think they'll both have a place. It used to be that I have a prop here. Where's my prop? I have like a nice silver coin back when $1 used to be basically the size of the palm of your hand. It was a 1922 silver eagle. They make them out of silver, out of sort of molten metal that had value. There was gold before that, then there was silver, and then there was fiat, and now there's stablecoins and Bitcoin. And so there's going to be a blend. In my mind, I'm more excited about sort of the use cases than what is being used. And that's perhaps sort of heresy for a lot of people in my space, but I don't care. I'm not sure who the winner is going to be. I don't think I have to know, and so I don't pretend to know. But like, there will be some token, some digitized version of something It could be a tokenized money market fund. It could be there's tokenized, ownership in gold. There's Bitcoin. There are various stable coins. But so they exist as people start using those more and more, that's where the value starts accruing. And that's sort of what I'm anxious to see happen more and more is, let's do token issuance on chain. Let's go more of that direct to consumer, capital raising for these projects. Add transparency to it and see what the fees are. I think that is really where the innovation comes from and where the value comes out of. Whether it's Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus Solana, I'll be very intrigued to find out. But I'm sort of agnostic. I think they all have to succeed to some degree. But in the end, I just like if you go back in time 100, 200 years, the gold had its moment, silver had its moment. And I don't have an example of one, but they used to have dollar bills used to say silver certificates on them because you could go to a bank and exchange it for a certain quantity of silver. Because it was like for like, so it was like literally an extension of the, so fiat currency didn't really exist. It was just a paper call on the actual base metal. And now we've sort of moved beyond that. But I think as things keep innovating, what will end up getting used for commerce, 10 years from now, to your question, I don't know, but I'm sure it'll be riding on crypto rails.
I want to ask, in the interest of time, a few short answer questions, if that's all right. The first one being, Coinbase continues to smash it out of the park. You keep getting hundreds of billions more in assets, perhaps $1 trillion in assets. Does that scare you?
No, not even a little. So I'm officially the CEO of our digital asset custodian. We're the largest digital asset custodian. We're the best capitalized custodian. And I have a great experience with a client. I guess I won't name his name. But when I first got the job running the custodian, I went in, I met with him, and I thought, he asked me, how big is the team? I'm like, oh, softball question. I got this one. I started answering the question. And before I got halfway through my answer, he started yelling at me. And I won't even use the F-bomb tirade he did. But basically, his point was, he's like, you screwed this up. It's like, you don't just hurt Coinbase. You don't just hurt Brian Armstrong. It's like, you hurt me. You hurt my company, my shareholders. And no. You have to understand your role. So, and it was, I tell the story to my team. It's a great electrifying story, especially given his vocabulary was quite clever. And so that alone is what we do, and we do it really well. So, but we have enough risk with X hundreds of billions of dollars that we have today, X being a number sort of greater than 2. It's large enough that we have that same weight on our shoulders. So we've built a business that will have multi-trillion dollars in custody. Again, we're in the trust business. We have a phenomenal security engineering team that is sort of larger than many of our competitors on their own. Take everyone that works at some of our competitors. Our security engineering team by itself is bigger. We have, a handful of PhDs in cryptography. That element of what we do is absolutely world class. And so that actually helps me sleep very, very well. So that isn't it. That's not what keeps me up. We yes, we take it very seriously. Yes, we put a lot of energy into it. And I go back to that conversation with this client from when I first took this job, and it was clarifying, sobering, but no, we have 100% of our attention on it. So I'm not to say it doesn't keep me up at night. That doesn't worry me. That's not where something bad comes from our cryptography or our systems failing.
Elon Musk, Donald Trump, good or bad for crypto?
They're a bit of both each. They're cheerleaders and proponents, very vocal, but as I said, I don't want this to be sort of a sideshow and sort of high drama. High drama is moderate to low success. We need to get rid of the drama. Again, legislation coming out of DC, super helpful, super constructive, gives the whole industry clarity. One of the bills is named the Clarity Act, but that's super important. I love to dial down the drama and just let business happen, because at some point they contend with each other, and I don't view that as long-term constructive.
If I was to ask someone in 100 years' time, how would you want to be described, and what would you want your legacy to be?
100 years' time, great grandkids. I almost don't want to be remembered like that, at all. If I have, if someone leaves a skid mark, on history, it's almost only bad. Try and think of good people and the impact they had. It's hard. So I almost don't want one, because it almost sort of guarantees you did something very dramatic and probably very wrong. So no, I'm good. I have daughters. I'm happy. If they're happy and they have happy lives, then that's all I need. If they tell bad dad jokes from time to time and they sort of throw it back to an ancestor which had a genetic defect of bad dad jokes, I'm good with that. That alone's enough. Anything more, I've really done something.
Both in your professional world and personal life, what's next for you? And you can look at any scope of time you want.
Well, we're not done here at Coinbase. We have some core things for us to do. We're in the middle. I mean, it feels like we're in we call it like a sprintathon. We go from sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint until it's effectively they stretch out into a marathon. But we're sort of 2/3 of the way into a few of those, and there's some big things that we want to close out. You know, Q1 of next year is a big quarter for us. We have this will be old news for the people watching this, but we have a big presentation more from our retail arm on the 17th of December with a lot of services that we've been working on very, very diligently. We're doing sort of similar degrees of investment on our institutional sides. Seeing that happen and seeing the story through, because again, we're sort of still in the early chapters of sort of an overall industry adoption. I think there's probably sort of a competitive wars with TradFi and digital asset companies, and we're going to have it out and slap at each other, and then we'll make friends and then just compete normally again. And so I want to live through that cycle. It's just riveting and it's very intriguing sort of academically and intellectually to be part of. And so still have some stuff there to do. After that, though, I have no idea. And that's sort of, it's a blessing and a curse to have like achieved your dreams. Because when you run out of dreams, it's a problem. So I dreamed of going to chef school, and I did that, and having kids go to college, and done that. I'm like, okay, it's like, well, now what? So the wife and I are like, well, we become like nomads and like travel around every few months, and we're not sure we can Marie Kondo our lives into a little neat, tidy package to then make ourselves travel, but don't know. So for now, it's keeping the Coinbase mission going.
Just before I ask my final question, I noticed what you said about Sprintathon quite interesting. Is that like a set time period? How does that work?
No, it's a defect of the industry and where it is in its growth curve, where we sprint at a goal and we get there, we have a business start, it starts growing, certain things don't work, which is fine. You expect that. Certain things work really well, then there's a regulatory change, or there's an opportunity, and there's so much opportunity in each opportunity that like you have to sprint at it. And then we have all these things we're sprinting at all the time. It's unsustainable, but we always seem to sustain it. It's not a viable long-term strategy, but we're sort of in that moment now. At some point we're going to have to sort of, rethink and rebalance things a bit. But it's definitely a moment, and it's the inflection point, the legislation coming out of DC in the past 10, 11 months. It's been quite something, and that change is sort of giving us an opportunity that we're not going to miss.
Again, just for my final point, what's the philosophical edge to that? What's the thing that is keeping you going? Is there a quote that you think about for that?
Oh, but sort of in high school, I knew I was going to be voted the most likely to succeed. I was valedictorian, the whole thing. I was going to be voted, and no, I wasn't. I was voted most studious, so basically the biggest nerd. And I'm like, that one still smarts. Some, almost 40 years later, that one still hurts. And then, but it goes back to a story. I remember it was summer of 2009, and one of the partners was sort of strolling down the trading floor, and he said hello, and I sort of prairie dog pop up, and I'm like, hey, Patty. He's like, oh, Rick. And a very sort of, he's a quant options trader guy, so a very sort of studious, British accent I won't try and mimic in front of you. He said, Rick, I, wouldn't have expected anyone to be in the office here on a Sunday, but had I expected anyone to be in the office here, I would have expected you. And that was the year I made MD. So it's just hard work. You get far by working hard, and you never get far by not working hard. And so it's just hard work. I like the hard work, and this is hard work. We continue to do it. And when it suddenly gets easy, or when I feel like I need to take it easy, that's when I've taken a wrong turn.
And my final question, and I ask this to every guest on Personable, is what is one thing that you would want a listener to take away from this episode?
I'd probably go back to where we started about me in 91, and that how having some semblance to sort of new grads of today, get your house together, mental house, physical health, and your physical house together. It's not an indictment upon you. You probably watch too many Disney movies where everything has a perfect happy ending and has a natural progression. And life is not like a Disney movie. I guess Disney does everyone an injustice there, as do all the social media influencers. So I would definitely recommend people should shift delete their social media. Obviously, a big non-fan, aside from the occasional podcast. And then just buckle down and work on self-improvement. Get a job, work hard, don't expect not to work hard, and don't expect success to come quickly. because it never does. And, just take it as that, and, everything else will fall in place eventually.
Thank you very much, Rick. I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount in this podcast, whether learning about your passion for becoming a chef and your why telling you had to go back and get a different job to pay for your kids and your mortgages, whether why an MBA isn't as important. Perhaps we'll have to get that on for another podcast, to telling your daughter about interest rates and why, and explaining to her, putting your money in the bank, that they're taking it and instead you should get a stable coin and you can get rewards that way. I found it fascinating to learn about what it takes to be a custodian and how that you're not afraid of getting even more assets under Coinbase. I feel like if you gave me a different answer, I think the world would be pretty worried. So I'm glad you gave me that. I really love your philosophical route on things and perspective. And it's definitely something that I try to get in this podcast, because I think there are commonalities between many of the world's best, whether you're someone like yourself or a CEO, founder of a company, an actor, an Olympian, whatever it may be. I think there are things that you can take. And I think that those are the things that keep you going in those sprintathon moments, always delivering on the next great thing. So thank you so much for coming on today, Rick. I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm sure my listeners have done the same. I wish all the best to you and to Coinbase.
Thanks, Harvey. Take care.